They did not expect silence. This is the thing that needs to be understood before anything else, because the expectation they carried into the rejection, the anticipation of what would follow it, was not silence. It was the familiar, the reaching back. The message that arrived within a time frame that confirmed the rejection had produced the impact it usually produces in the people the avoidant has moved through. The visible wound of someone who needed their approval enough that its withdrawal would generate the predictable, familiar, entirely manageable response of a person whose self-orientation toward the avoidant had been interrupted and was working to restore itself. The rejection was not cruelty, not always, not in most cases. It was the operation of the avoidance system doing what the system does when something has gotten close enough to threaten the equilibrium, creating distance through the withdrawal of the warmth or the availability or the explicit stepping back that communicates without requiring the direct language that the avoidance management avoids, that the closeness is being reduced to a manageable level. The rejection is the management in one of its more visible forms, and the management in its previous operations across the avoidance relational history has almost always produced a specific response in the person receiving it. Not your response, not silence, not the specific, complete, genuinely inhabited quality of someone who absorbed the rejection and then, without drama and without the performing of moving on, simply redirected, turned toward their own life with the full force of the attention that had been, until the rejection, directed in the avoidance direction. The silence arrived, and the avoidant, whose system was prepared for the familiar response and is extraordinarily ill-equipped for this one, has been in a state of interior disruption that the composed exterior is working continuously and at increasing cost to conceal. The disruption is not simple. It is not the single, clean emotional response of someone processing a straightforward loss. It is several distinct interior events occurring simultaneously, each feeding into the others, producing a compound experience that the avoidance ordinary management strategies were not designed to handle at this volume or this specificity. The first event is the failure of the prediction. The avoidance relational history has provided, across many interactions with many people, a reliable data set about what rejections produce. The data set says, rejection produces reaching. The person who cared pulls toward the withdrawing. The loss of warmth generates the pursuit of warmth. The stepping back of the avoidant generates the stepping forward of the person they stepped back from. The prediction is not a conscious strategy. It is the accumulated pattern recognition of someone who has run this sequence often enough that the outcome feels, before it arrives, essentially certain. Your silence has invalidated the prediction, and the invalidation of a deeply held, extensively confirmed, entirely reliable prediction is not a small interior event. It generates the specific, disorienting experience of someone whose model of a situation has just been demonstrated to be wrong in a way that cannot be accommodated by minor adjustment. The model requires revision, and the model that requires revision is not just the model of how you specifically would respond. It is the model of how people respond to the avoidant in general, the model that confirms the self-sufficiency narrative, that positions the avoidant as the less invested party, that maintains the asymmetry that the ego requires to sustain itself. Your silence is evidence against the model, and evidence against the model is evidence against the narrative. And evidence against the narrative is the beginning of the destabilization of something that the avoidant's entire relational identity has been built around. The second interior event is the reversal of the dynamic's power structure. Throughout the connection, the avoidant held the structural position of the less invested party. This position was not, in most cases, genuinely reflective of the interior state. The investment was present, real, pressing against the management with the force of genuine attachment. But the position was maintained. In the external, behavioral expression of the connection, the avoidant was the one who needed less, reached less, whose continued engagement was the thing being worked for rather than the thing doing the working. This positioning is not merely comfortable for the avoidant, it is functionally necessary. The self-sufficiency narrative, the story that maintains the self-concept through the accumulated history of managed connection, requires the positioning. The avoidant must be the less invested party for the narrative to hold. The management exists, in significant part, to ensure this positioning is maintained regardless of the interior reality. Your silence after the rejection has inverted the positioning in a way that the management cannot simply correct by increasing the distance, because the silence is not a response to the avoidant that can be managed. It is a withdrawal of you from the dynamic entirely, and the withdrawal of you from the dynamic means the avoidant is no longer the less invested party. They are simply the party, the one remaining, the one whose interior is still oriented toward the connection, while the other person has, with a completeness that the management did not predict and cannot reverse, genuinely redirected. The less invested party narrative requires two parties. Your silence has reduced the party count to one, and the one remaining is the one who, in the private, unwitnessed, entirely honest accounting of their own interior, is significantly more invested than the narrative of the less invested party permits. The third interior event is the shame, not the general, ambient shame that the avoidant carries about the gap between their presented and actual self, though that is present. The specific, pointed, this situation shame of someone who performed a rejection with the confidence of a person whose prediction was reliable and whose prediction has been demonstrated to be wrong in the most direct and most undeniable way available. The rejection was an expression of the management, of the system's response to something that was getting close enough to be threatening. It was not a considered, fully conscious, carefully weighed decision made by someone who had examined all available information and arrived at a conclusion. It was the avoidant sphere doing what the avoidant sphere does, creating distance through the most available mechanism in the moment that the intimacy pressure reached the threshold. Your silence says, without a single word, that the rejection's premise was false, that the thing the rejection was managing against, the intimacy pressure of your investment in the avoidant, is not, as it turns out, something you were unable to withdraw from when the avoidant system deemed withdrawal necessary, that the orientation toward the avoidant was a choice being made rather than a dependency being managed, and that the choice, in the aftermath of the rejection, was revised. The revision is the shame's source, because the revision is evidence that the rejection produced not the desired outcome, the reduction of intimacy pressure to a manageable level while the connection remained available, but the loss of the connection entirely. The management system, optimizing for the reduction of pressure, produced the destruction of the thing the pressure was coming from. And the thing the pressure was coming from was, the shame is now confirming, worth more than the management's continued comfort. What the silence has produced in the accumulated operation of all three of these interior events is the specific and genuinely difficult experience of someone who used their own system against themselves, who ran a pattern that was designed to protect them from loss and produced, through the running of it, the precise loss it was designed to prevent. The avoidant cannot express this easily, cannot say it to anyone, cannot even in most cases say it cleanly to themselves. The defenses are too practiced, the narratives too available, the various ways of framing what happened that locate the responsibility outside the self too well developed to simply dissolve in the presence of the evidence. But the evidence is present. And the evidence does what evidence does when it is undeniable and the defenses are running at their limit. It presses. It accumulates. It makes itself felt in the specific, sourceless, pervasive quality of discomfort that follows the avoidant through their days in the aftermath of your silence. The restlessness, the flatness at the center of experiences that should feel sufficient. The involuntary returning of attention to you in moments that are not about you and that become, through the returning, about you. You did not plan this destruction. The silence was not deployed. It was arrived at through the honest, privately painful, entirely legitimate process of someone who had been rejected and discovered, in the sitting with the rejection, that the reaching back was not something they had the reserves to do, that the reserves had been spent across the duration of the connection in the generous, patient, ultimately insufficient project of making themselves available to someone who kept communicating through one form or another, that the availability was a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be received. The silence is the result of a depletion. And the depletion was the result of a generosity that was never adequately met. And the silence, arriving from the honest place of genuine depletion, is more truthful and more impactful than any strategic withdrawal could have been, because it carries no agenda and no performance and no orientation toward the avoidance response. It simply is the natural sound of someone who has redirected, and the avoidant whose perceptiveness reads the genuine from the performed with the accuracy of someone whose survival once depended on that reading knows the difference. They know the silence is real. They know the redirection is genuine. They know, in the interior where the true accounting is kept, what the silence means and what produced it, and what the production of it says about the cost their pattern has been charging the people who most generously paid it. The destruction is not punishment, it is consequence. The natural, honest, entirely earned consequence of a system that was optimized for the avoidance comfort at the consistent cost of yours. Finally, in the specific form of your silence, encountering the full price of what that optimization was always quietly costing. You did not destroy them. You simply stopped absorbing the cost on their behalf. And the cost, landing where it was always supposed to land, on the person whose choices generated it, is doing what costs do when they are finally honestly allowed to be felt.